You can fly higher than the sky, shine brighter than the stars. You can have all you ever wanted.
So in order to make the Pona jacket, you're going to need your pattern pieces, you're going to need your fabric, you're going to need a little bit of interfacing. I've got a whole roll there, but you don't need that much. You'll need your thread and your sewing machine. So let's get started. So prepare your pattern pieces and then it's time to cut out the fabric. So I've got 3 meters of this dupioni. Right, so I've cut out a neck facing piece. I've cut one on the fold and I've also cut an interfacing. So I've cut a collar piece. Actually, I've cut 2 collar pieces on the fold and I've cut one interfacing on the fold. So I've cut a front facing. Now this is a big wide front facing, so I can't really get it all on camera. But because I'm cutting the short version out, I've added 2 inches down here. And that's just because the first one I made was a tad short. And if my facing was a little bit longer, I could get a little bit more length without using more fabric on the front and the back pieces, but I'll show you about that as we go along. So I've cut out a sleeve piece. So on my first version I cut the fabric to here, so this is full length here, and I cut it to there, and it was a little bit short on my arms, not massively so, bracelet length, but I did want that extra length, so I've cut it full length for this version. This is my back piece, which I have cut on the fold. Again, I've done the short version. I've done 2 small pocket pieces and I've got a front piece. So what you want to do now is attach your interfacing to one of your collar pieces and to your neck facing. Follow manufacturer's instructions for pressing your interfacing. Most people suggest not using steam, however I do use a little bit of steam as I seem to get a better grip on the fabric from the interfacing from that. But just follow manufacturer's instructions and you'll be fine. So there's not that many notches on this pattern, but you do want to mark the notches that are there. So I've interfaced my back facing and one of my collar pieces. So we'll put those to the side now. If you've got a fabric that frays easily, you'll want to finish the edges at this stage because you don't want your fabric unravelling before you've even made it. Now ideally I should be serging these edges. If you don't have a serger, you can use a overcast stitch on your sewing machine. I'm not going to do it because I haven't got any serger thread that matches this. Anything I do have will stand out significantly, so I am just going to try and be really careful with my pattern pieces. So this is the front piece and I'm going to stay stitch that neckline along there. Basically anywhere there's a curve you'll want to stay stitch. So I'm going to do it on my front neckline, my back neckline and my facing neckline. And you'll want to use quite a small stitch, say I'll use about a 2.0 stitch and I'll be doing it at 3/8 of an inch, so it's within the seam allowance. Right, so that's my automatic settings. I'm just going to reduce that down to 2.0 stitch. It'll be a straight stitch, everything else will stay the same. I'll press the foot up alongside the fabric so that I'm doing 3/8. And it'll help if I threaded the machine, wouldn't it?
You can fly.
So now I'm going to sew a seam across the shoulder on both sides. So you might notice that I've got post-it note, I've stuck it down with sellotape and I've put that at 5/8, so it just ensures accuracy while I'm sewing. You might notice I'm not using pins, but you should feel free to do so if you want. the shoulder seams. Now I'm going to attach the seams from the facing front to the facing back, like that, at 5/8. So now you want to iron your seams open. So for the next bit, I need to put bias binding all around the edge of my facing on the outer edge. So from one hip all the way round to the other hip. It's really hard to show on here because the pieces are quite big. So this is an opportunity for me to use my bias binding kit. Now I did use this on my first one and it really helped. I've also got this bias binding which goes with my fabric. So in here, there's two little grippers, so the bias binding goes in there, like facing outwards. So I've fed the bias binding in and made sure it's within these two little hooks here, and then just pulled it through a bit. And what I need to do now is butt my fabric up against that, and then it takes away all the effort for sewing. So that's done. Just needs a good press.
You can fly higher than the sky, shine brighter than the stars. You can have all you ever wanted.
So now we need to turn up the cuffs of the sleeve. Now we need to turn it up 1/4 of an inch and then 1.75 of an inch up to the little markers. So now we're going to attach the top of the sleeve head to the main body. So we're not going to sew this up just yet at the hem. We're going to attach the sleeve to the main body first. To the shoulder seam, use a pin, then attach at either end. Due to the design, you don't need to gather it in, but you will see there is some ease there. So if you put the ease side on the feed dogs, that will sort itself out when it goes through the sewing machine. So you'll see that there's some ease in there, but no puckers on either side and no gathers. Right, so I've got my ham and we're going to iron the sleeve head. Because there's a slight curve on the sleeve head, you'll need a ham, or something else you can use is a rolled up piece of towel like that. Don't forget to finish your seams. I haven't been finishing my seams and I'm being lazy, but you should finish your seams. You could serge it, you could pink it, you could fold it under like that and top stitch. You could do a Hong Kong binding on that. There's lots of things you could do and it does fray a bit, but this isn't going to go in the washing machine, so I'm not too worried about that. So it's quite hard to show here because it's a big piece, but there's the hem and here's the sleeve. So you're going to sew all the way around there, but you need to pin in place first. That's the first place you want to pin, and then you want to pin at the sleeve head. So I've matched both sleeve hem creases. That's the bodice hem, goes up into the sleeve and then down the sleeve arm. So you're going to pin both sides and then go to the sewing machine and sew those up at 5/8 of an inch. So starting at the sleeve, you want to work your way all the way down to the hem. You want to make sure that your seam underneath is laying flat. So I've done that.
You can fly higher than the sky, shine brighter than the
So there we are, all pinked. Now I need to go and iron my seam. Then we'll move on to creating the collar. Because I need to iron my sleeve seam, I'm going to use my rolled up terry toweling. So I've got my terry toweling in there and it acts like a ham. It's opened it up nicely. So that's the whole of that sleeve done. I'm going to repeat on this side.
Shine brighter than the stars. You can have all you ever wanted.
So then you want to do an edge stitch about 1/8 of an inch from the edge there, but just beware, it will obviously show up on the right side. So I'm not going to do that. I am going to hand stitch this at the end when I do some other hand stitching. Right, new angle here. So I've got my 2 collar pieces. One has been interfaced and one hasn't. So you want to put the right sides together. It doesn't matter for me because both sides are the same. You should have some notches here, so you'll match them up. So 3 sides, up the short side, along the long side and down there. It's the more curved side that you don't want to be sewing. You need to leave that open. So you sew the 3 unnotched sides at 5/8. Rather than pivoting, I am going to sew all the way to the edge, take it up and then start sewing again.
You can fly higher than the sky.
So as you'll see here, I have just crossed over my seams rather than pivoting, as that will give me a more accurate seam. So now I need to clip this, grade it, which just means to trim one side of the seam allowance down, and then we'll be turning it through. You may also want to clip your corners. I'm clipping up to the seam line but not through it at various points. So you may want to clip your corners like that. It's not actually necessary. I don't always do it. Where you cross your stitches, you don't want to go through it. I've cut my seams like that. Now we want to turn it in the right way, press it, and then top stitch it. I've graded the edge and I've trimmed the corners. So when you're turning it in the right way to iron, you want this crease line to go slightly to the underside. Now the underside is the side without the interfacing. So we'll do that, and that's just so that it doesn't show when you're wearing it. First of all, we're going to just give it a press like this, just to get it to flatten out a bit. It says in the instructions the non-interfaced side will go facing the actual coat, but I'm going to use the non-interfaced side as the outside, so the underside with the interfacing will be touching the coat. So there we are. So now I'm going to top stitch 1/4 inch all the way around. So this foot has got a, not a blade, but like a little, I don't know what you'd call it. So that just means that when I put my fabric underneath, it'll butt up against the fabric and help me have a straight line of top stitching. I'm going to move the needle over as far as I can. Few issues there, so I'm going to have to redo that bit. Give that an iron and we're done.
You can fly higher than the sky, shine brighter than the stars. You can have all you ever.
Pressing really does elevate it, look. Right, so the next part is we're going to attach our collar to our main outer piece. Now I've got the main outer piece laying down with right side facing up. So then I'm going to place the collar on top of that, and whichever side you want to be on show, you want that on top, and so the underside of the collar facing the back of the main bit. You've got notches there and you want to match the notches up with each side seam. So let's pin that together, and your collar piece, if you can see that, your collar piece should end where your notch is, which mine does for one. So once that's all pinned, you want to do a basting stitch at 3/8 of an inch. As you're pinning it, you may need to clip it to get it to lay straight. I haven't needed to do that, but I may do it in the next section. So I'm just going to put a basting stitch down. In order to do a basting stitch, you want to pull it to the largest stitch length. Mine's 5, but yours might be 4. So I've got halfway through, and I do need to clip a little bit. So now I've got the collar attached to the main piece. So when attaching, this is your collar, that's your back piece. So when you're attaching your facing, you want it right sides together with the collar, because when it flips over, it has that part showing inside. I've pinned the facing to the main body with the collar sandwiched in the middle, and I've just pinned all across the top. Now I'm going to sew at 5/8 from one end all across the top to the other end. You may need to clip to ease the collar in. So I've got the basting stitch off, and I'm down to 2.5 length. So now I'm going to sew across the top. So now I've sewn right across, because there's quite a few layers here, especially if you're using a thicker fabric. You'll need to grade the bottom seam, which just means trim half of it off. Clip and grade your seams there, and then we will move on to the next part. So now we've sewn the facing to the neck edge, we need to sew the bottom at the hem. So here's the hem of my facing, here's the hem of my side piece. You just want to line it up. So the hem of the facing is naturally shorter than the main hem. So if you see there, my facing hem is shorter than my main hem, and that's okay. I made mine a bit longer, so yours may even be a little bit shorter, which just means you'll have a larger hem on the bottom of your jacket. But I wanted a little bit less of a hem to make my jacket a little bit longer, so I added 2 inches. But what you want to do is bring the facing hem down to meet the main hem like that, and pin. So the facing is quite wide, and I have pinned right across, and now what we're going to do is sew it 5/8 all the way across, and then when we turn it in the right way, that will help us bring up the hem. You'll see what I mean when we get there. So now you'll see that my hem is sewn there, but I still haven't sewn the side yet. So if we just turn it in the right way, so you'll see I've got a bit of a hem there, and then I can just fold that under and hem that right across, and that'd be really neat. I'll do that bit by hand. So now what we need to do is sew the side seam. Drag it down like that. In order to account for the extra space, I've just folded it under like that and made the seam go up, and now we're going to sew that. But when we fold it in the right way, the hem will be on the inside. You want to do that on both sides of your jacket, and then once you've done that, we'll go to the ironing board. We're all done with our sewing. Now we need to give it a good press. So we've got the bottom of the hem here, fold it over 1/4 inch and press. So we've got a nice press line, so that when we do hand stitch it, there is no raw edges. Now we're going to turn it in the right way, and hopefully it will all look good. This is the front of the facing, which will fold over like that once it's ironed. What you need to be careful of is when you're ironing it, you'll have a break point where the collar folds over, and when it folds over you don't want the seam to be seen, so the top part you need to iron as if it was the under part, if you know what I mean, and then the bottom part like that, so that when it folds over you won't see any of the seam. So I'm going to give the collar a press now. But you can press this after you've done your hand stitching or your machine stitching. There isn't anything to say you've got to do hand stitching on this. You could potentially sew it on the sewing machine, but I think it's going to look much better if it's hand sewn. Right, so I've pinned the hem. All is left to do now is to hand stitch the hem, tack the facing down at the shoulders, and then we're done.
You can fly high.